Bom dia a todas e todos. A Diretoria de Relações Internacionais da Universidade Federal de Pernambuco, na pessoa do seu diretor, eu, professor Madison Góes Diniz, apresenta o Fórum Internacional Recife Exchange Netherlands, visões e estratégias sobre a elevação do nível do mar no Recife e nos Países Baixos. Os ciclos do Recife Exchange se estabelecem como uma iniciativa que alia ensino, pesquisa e extensão universitária. Sua abordagem de intercâmbio internacional de saberes em relação ao ordenamento urbano consolidou parcerias estratégicas no âmbito internacional. Ao debater temas emergentes na pauta local e global, o Recife Exchange abre perspectivas de transformação na forma de compreender a cidade, buscando soluções que impulsionem políticas públicas para cidades integradas, acolhedoras e sustentáveis. Nesse contexto, nossa mesa de abertura, com o tema Mudanças Climáticas, o desafio das cidades costeiras, contará com a presença das seguintes autoridades: o magnífico vice-reitor da UFPE, professor Moacir Araújo, o ilustríssimo professor Roberto Montezuma, arquiteto urbanista, professor e pesquisador da UFPE, Jean Paul Corten, diretor da Agência de Patrimônio Cultural dos Países Baixos, Marcela Formiga, oficial de Assuntos Políticos, Diplomacia Pública e Cultural da Embaixada dos Países Baixos no Brasil, Alain Grimard, oficial nacional para o Brasil da ONU Habitat, o magnífico reitor da IAG Delft, Institute for Water Education, Unesco, Ed Moore, e o senhor Luiz Carvalho, arquiteto, urbanista, PhD na TU Delft, e a excelentíssima senhora vice-prefeita da cidade do Recife, Isabela de Roldão. Saudamos a mesa de abertura, nas autoridades aqui descritas, os pesquisadores, panelistas, conferencistas, aos professores e professoras, pesquisadoras, estudiosos e entusiastas do tema. Nesse instante, para fazer a abertura, passamos a palavra para o vice-reitor da Universidade Federal de Pernambuco, professor Moacir Araújo, que fará suas considerações iniciais.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. As a vice rector of the Federal University of Pernambuco, I'm really very proud to be here. This is a very important meeting with a hot topic, I would say, concerning climate change and all the forcing that we have to face today. And I'm sure that the connection between Recife and Netherlands is really very proficuous, not only because we have a close link, a long history of cooperation and cultural exchange, but also because we are able to exchange our experience concerning sea level rise and how can we do that to mitigate this enforcing, I would say. So thank you for the invitation. On behalf of the Federal University of Pernambuco, I'm really proud to be here again. And I'm sure that we have a nice meeting all along the week. And I'm sure that we thank our cooperation and to have more exchange, still more exchange than we have now. So that's what I would like to say in this first moment, very first moment. And welcome on behalf of the UFPE, welcome all of you that are hearing us, that are seeing us, that want to discuss more and to learn more about sea level rise in Recife and in Netherlands. Thank you.
Em tempo, gostaríamos de registrar aqui a ausência do reitor da Universidade Federal de Pernambuco, professor Alfredo Macedo Gomes, que se encontra ausente nessa solenidade por questões de foro íntimo. Nesse sentido, nós passamos agora a palavra para Jean-Paul Corten, diretor da Agência de Patrimônio Cultural dos Países Baixos, para fazer a sua fala inicial.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Great to be here and wonderful to see all this happening for real now. Okay, I'll start with a brief introduction. Honorable Mr. Campos, Mayor of Recife, esteemed colleagues, dear participants and attendants. It is a great pleasure for me, representing the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science of the Netherlands, to address you in this opening session. Today, we finally start the next phase in a long-lasting cooperation between the city of Recife and the Netherlands. A cooperation that today exists for 10 fruitful years already. The subject of our cooperation has always been the historic urban landscape. This year, we jointly focus on the topical urgency of the water challenges that this historic urban landscape has to tackle. The relation between water challenges and heritage management is a complex one and has more dimensions. First of all, we can distinguish an historical dimension. History explains why current water systems are as they are, and in history, we may find old and forgotten water practices that may pose solutions for current issues. There also is a heritage dimension, which is about protecting valued heritage to water threats, but which is also about adapting heritage to changing circumstances, as heritage actually has always been doing. Last but not least, there is a spatial dimension in the water-heritage relation. In this dimension, both disciplines join the planning discipline to accommodate the societal need for a sustainable and resilient future. Although the conditions differ largely per country, the challenges we face on each side of the Atlantic Ocean are quite comparable. Thus, there is reason for exchange of knowledge and expertise. And for this reason, the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands is very much in favor of this kind of international cooperation, for the good of both, of course. Thus, to conclude, I'm looking forward to a fruitful forum and wish us all a pleasant time, since that is what I have learned. Working with Brazil always includes a lot of fun. Thank you.
Nesse momento, nós passamos a palavra ao professor Roberto Montezuma, arquiteto, urbanista, professor e pesquisador da UFPE, para proferir sua fala de abertura.
Bom dia a todos. Na qualidade de coordenador geral da equipe brasileira, gostaríamos de cumprimentar o vice-reitor, Moacir Araújo, né, e com ele os parceiros acadêmicos, em nome do vice-prefeito do Recife, Isabela de Rodan, as cidades parceiras desse evento, em nome do Observatório do Recife, Francisco Cunha, a sociedade civil organizada, em nome do RCE, Jean-Paul Corten, coordenador-geral da equipe neerlandesa, RXN, e das Nações Unidas, Alain Grimard, os parceiros internacionais. É uma honra abrir mais um encontro RX. A minha fala terá como eixo 3 verbos: celebrar, contextualizar e envolver. O primeiro, celebrar os 10 anos da fundação de uma rede de cidades em intercâmbio internacional para encontrar soluções inovadoras, capazes de sensibilizar políticas públicas. Alcançamos com os RX a revelação da visão holística do Recife Árvore d'Água, bem como a perspectiva do planejamento de longo prazo, como a marca coletiva Recife 500 anos. a reinvenção do centro histórico articulado ao Parque Caparibe e a cidade parque. O segundo verbo é contextualizar. O RXN-2021 vai se debruçar sobre as águas como patrimônio, tendo as mudanças climáticas e o aumento do nível do mar como os desafios a serem enfrentados, como disse bem Jean Paul. O terceiro verbo é envolver. Cada vez mais, a sociedade brasileira e todos os nossos parceiros internacionais com o objetivo de refletir sobre os diferentes conhecimentos científicos, populares, para juntos encontrarmos caminhos mais pertinentes e não permitir que o Recife, capital mais antiga do Brasil, e tantas outras cidades percam significativas partes do seu patrimônio urbano simplesmente numa ação embaixo d'água. Finalizando, agradecemos a todos que nos acompanham e convidamos os novos integrantes para o fortalecimento dessa rede colaborativa, para reponderarmos os desafios de um mundo em convulsão, onde cidades podem ser compreendidas como células de um planeta que pede reinvenção. Obrigado.
Nesse momento, nós passamos a palavra para a ilustríssima senhora Marcela Formiga, oficial de Assuntos Políticos, Diplomacia Pública e Cultural da Embaixada dos Países Baixos no Brasil.
Bom dia e boa tarde. Eu queria agradecer a esse honroso convite em nome da Embaixada dos Países Baixos. Para a gente é um prazer estar aqui e ver a consolidação de um trabalho de 10 anos, de uma frutífera parceria. A Embaixada, através do Fundo de Patrimônio Cultural Compartilhado, apoiou esse projeto desde o começo, em suas várias edições, e para a gente é com imensa alegria que a gente vê essa consolidação e todo esse tempo que a gente passou conversando, principalmente com o professor Roberto Montezuma, com o pessoal do RCE, foi muito enriquecedor ver um projeto como esse, que rende muitos frutos, e eu tenho certeza que essa semana agora de discussões vai ser muito enriquecedora, e certamente novas ideias vão surgir, e podem contar com a Embaixada através do fundo, que lança um edital anual para patrimônio compartilhado, para o fundo, e a gente está aberto sempre a novas propostas. Então fica aqui o nosso interesse em continuar parcerias, em continuar trabalhando em prol do patrimônio, e eu desejo a todos um excelente fórum e novas e excelentes discussões. Obrigada.
Nesse instante, nós passamos a palavra ao senhor Alain Grimard, oficial nacional para o Brasil da ONU Habitat.
Obrigado, Madson. Bom dia para todas e todos. Saudações ao vice-reitor Moacir Araújo, Jean-Paul Cotten, Roberto Montezuma, Marcela Formiga, da Embaixada da Holanda, e outros comitês, Edimores, e a vice-prefeita do Recife, a senhora Isabela. Em primeiro lugar, gostaria de felicitar ou parabenizar as duas organizações que organizarão este fórum, a saber, a Universidade Federal de Pernambuco e o Cultural Heritage Agency of the Kingdom of Netherlands. No âmbito do Circuito Urbano, organizado cada ano pelo ONU Habitat, em Brasil, tenho o prazer de participar esta manhã da primeira mesa do fórum, que tem como tema o desafio das cidades costeiras em relação com as mudanças climáticas. Certamente um assunto que pode facilmente reunir dois países como o Brasil e os Países Baixos, que, à primeira vista, podem parecer muito distintos devido às suas distâncias e dimensões diferentes. E entre os dois existe, naturalmente, a Organização das Nações Unidas, uma organização cujo principal mandato é promover o intercâmbio e a cooperação entre os países, por mais diferentes que sejam. O ONU Habitat é uma das dezenas de agências que se originam das Nações Unidas. Acredito que cada uma das agências, independente do seu mandato, pode facilmente encontrar uma razão para se envolver no debate e na ação para combater a mudança climática. No caso do ONU Habitat, é evidente que estamos concentrados nossos esforços no papel que as cidades podem desempenhar. O ONU Habitat tem atuado para destacar o papel central da urbanização sustentável nesse esforço mundial. Como declarado anteriormente pelo secretário-geral da ONU, Antônio Guterres, a luta contra a mudança climática será ganha ou perdida nas cidades. O futuro do planeta depende das ações de nossos residentes urbanos. A concentração do crescimento econômico e da população nas cidades os torna contribuintes-chave para a mudança climática. Com uma taxa de urbanização de mais de 80% e mais de 5.000 cidades em todo o país, é claro, no caso do Brasil, que a luta será ganha através das cidades. Gosto de mencionar, porque acredito ser verdade, que, embora a adoção dos ODS, Objetivo de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, estabelecidos pela ONU, seja o resultado de negociações e acordos entre países, em última instância, a ação e os resultados tangíveis recaem sobre a ação das cidades. Há estudos que mostram em algum país que até 70% das ações em favor dos ODS são originárias ou passam pelas cidades. E embora estejamos falando dos ODS em geral, acredito que a mesma porcentagem pode ser aplicada quando se trata do tema da luta contra a mudança climática. O papel da cidade é crucial. Repito porque é importante. A luta contra as mudanças climáticas, que representa a maior ameaça ao desenvolvimento sustentável, será ganha ou perdida nas cidades. A forma como projetamos as infraestruturas e as formas das cidades, e talvez, acima de todas, as cidades costeiras, será decisiva para entrar no caminho para alcançar o Acordo de Paris sobre mudanças climáticas e os ODS. É necessário inspirar a ação climática local com base em evidências científicas e definir compromissos e planos de ação em diferentes níveis. As organizações locais, universidades também, os governos locais devem tomar medidas ambiciosas para atingirem a neutralidade de carbono e se tornarem resilientes ao clima ao mesmo tempo em que precisam ser socialmente justas para viver, trabalhar e se divertir junto. Desejo a todas e todos vocês do Recife, do Pernambuco, do Brasil e dos Países Baixos um fórum cheio de atividades formativas e, sobretudo, mobilizadoras. Obrigado.
Nesse instante, nós passamos a palavra a Ed Morse, reitor da IIG Delft Institute for Water Education, Nesse.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm quite honored that I'm allowed to say a few words to you at the start of this, I think, very interesting workshop and conference that you will have in the coming days. I would like to stress, actually, that was also said by the former speakers. One is, I think, the very strong link to the Sustainable Development Goals, as Ellen Grimond just mentioned, but also, I think, the important link to World Heritage. And there, I would like to also say that besides being rector of IIG Delft, I'm also president of the World Network on Water Museums. I just shared a link on our chat box here that maybe the organization can also share with other participants. And why I think this is important is not only because I think we can learn from the past, but also, and that's the challenge of these water museums, to look at the future. And one very important one is where we're facing the challenge of climate change. And I think that maybe if I can say a few words about the history of IHE Delft, that illustrates a bit why this importance is there. IHE Delft actually started in 1957, and it was just a few years after we had the big inundations in the Netherlands, where a lot of people died in. And then in 1957, the Netherlands got a request from East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, if we could help with the floods that they were facing at the time in there. Then at that period in time, we started with hardcore engineering, actually. So what we're looking at is how can we protect everything that we have with dikes and with all sorts of other hard engineering type of developments that we could think of. That also worked in the Netherlands, but in the years that followed later on, we also discovered that that's not always the best solution. You also have to look at other issues, and in the past, we were not completely aware that this climate change was coming up. So slowly, we also developed, together with, of course, others in the world, the thinking and the ideas about that we have to be flexible, adaptive. We have to face the fact that climate change is not a static issue, but it will keep on changing in the future. And like I said, it's not only climate change, it's also increased population density of the areas, different insights. Water quality is a very important issue that we should also face, and is, as far as I can see it, increasing and will continue to increase. So all this brings things together, and that's where I hope a little bit on you, also in this conference, that you will also discuss and maybe even come in some new ideas by sharing your thoughts about what new sorts of innovations we may face and can use in a setting like, for example, Recife, but also for cities like The Hague or Rotterdam or Dhaka or other cities that are on the coast that are facing those challenges of sea level rise, with all the other challenges, including sometimes land subsidization and population density. So I wish you a very, very fruitful next coming days, and I'm very much looking forward to the outcome of that. Thank you very much.
Nesse instante, nós passamos a palavra à excelentíssima senhora vice-prefeita da cidade do Recife, Isabela de Roldão, para que possa fazer suas considerações iniciais na abertura desse evento.
Gratidão, Madison. Inicialmente, bom dia a todas e todos, boa tarde também. Gostaria já de antemão de agradecer o convite, né, em nome do prefeito João Campos, o convite do querido reitor Alfredo, do nosso amigo Roberto Montezuma, professor Roberto Montezuma. Gratidão pelo convite e saúdo a todas e todos nessa mesa de abertura, e desejando já de antemão que o fórum seja, de fato, muito proveitoso, né, para ambas as partes, para que todas e todos possamos construir, sim, uma cidade cada vez mais possível de ser habitada. Mas eu tenho aqui algumas considerações para fazer nesse momento, primeiro reiterando a importância que a gente vê da paradiplomacia. Já nesse momento onde a gente, há 10 anos que acontecem esses fóruns, essas trocas, mas a importância da paradiplomacia na temática da resiliência, da emergência climática. E aqui, diante dessa paradiplomacia, onde a gente aprende, troca e busca uma grande alternativa que seja comum à existência humana na Terra, eu, inclusive, faço menção aqui, tenho sempre na mente a mensagem do então presidente, à época, então presidente Barack Obama, onde ele já pontuava que nós somos a primeira geração a sentir efetivamente as mudanças climáticas e a geração que tem por responsabilidade fazer com que essa mudança não aconteça para a manutenção da vida humana na Terra. E aí dizer que a gente aqui em Recife tem trabalhado arduamente para a manutenção dessa cidade cada vez menos poluente. Inclusive, compartilho com vocês que o prefeito João Campos determinou, na verdade, através de um decreto, onde a nossa rede, onde a nossa prefeitura, desde o primeiro semestre, está proibida, por exemplo, de fazer compras de plásticos descartáveis. Então, as questões climáticas são muito urgentes, especialmente quando a gente desenvolveu um plano local de ação climática, onde veio o resultado de que Recife é a 16ª cidade mais frágil nesse planeta. E aqui a capital, como bem colocou o professor Roberto Montezuma, a capital que primeiro fará 500 anos, agora é a capital mais frágil e mais, eu diria, mais factível, né, de que aconteçam aí as inundações. Então, diante de tudo isso, a importância da gente poder participar de um fórum desse, onde as trocas aconteçam, os aprendizados se façam presentes. Aqui eu saúdo também a ONU Habitat, que tem sido um grande parceiro da gente, Alain, aqui na cidade do Recife, e dizer da importância de que mais fóruns, mais instâncias de discussão aconteçam, para que a gente possa aprender as lições e tomar as decisões com assertividade, com coragem. Então, a gente precisa aqui, acima de tudo, assumir um compromisso de que, como bem foi dito anteriormente, as mudanças acontecem nas cidades e é na cidade que as pessoas vivem, e é essa cidade que precisa ter esse olhar mais direcionado para que a gente consiga fazer a mudança de chave necessária. A emergência climática que aflige, e aí eu trago um exemplo aos que não estão aqui em Recife, aos que não são de Recife. Nós tivemos, pela primeira vez, um inverno esse ano, onde a gente chegou a uma temperatura de 20 graus. Isso pode ser motivo de, poxa, mas 20 graus é uma besteira para os invernos, por exemplo, na Holanda. Mas aqui para a gente, no Nordeste, aqui na nossa capital, a gente ter às 5 da manhã uma temperatura de 20 graus é uma temperatura assustadora. A gente nunca teve um inverno de 20 graus. Nosso inverno sempre foi de chuva e calor, e não de 20 graus. Então, isso é, de fato, uma amostra de que a gente precisa assumir com responsabilidade e com coragem a determinação de mudar essa chave para que a construção, a manutenção da vida humana, especialmente aqui na nossa cidade, por estar nessa colocação de fragilidade, para que a gente consiga fazer com que a gente reverta e inverta essa curva ascendente da emergência climática. Então, é importante que a gente esteja juntas e juntos nessa temática, nessa discussão, entendendo que Recife já assumiu o compromisso, junto à Embaixada do Reino Unido, de zerar carbono, neutralizar carbono até 2050. A gente assume com responsabilidade os ODS determinados, assumimos um compromisso junto ao MCR 2030, assumimos essa questão do Race to Zero, também está na pauta. Estamos agora indo para a COP26 com uma representação importante para ampliar esse nível de discussão, e essa troca que vai acontecer nesse seminário é fundamental para a gente continue nessa crescente, como bem lembrou o nosso querido Roberto, de que Recife assume pautas importantes, inclusive de se tornar, sim, uma cidade-parque. Afinal de contas, as águas na nossa cidade, especialmente, são nosso maior patrimônio. Não apenas sob a ótica da necessária água para a manutenção da vida humana, mas também como uma cidade-parque, entendendo que a pauta da sustentabilidade também passa pela temática da forma como as pessoas vivem. Então, focando nessa cidade para as pessoas, mas, acima de tudo, construída com as pessoas, é que a gente assume os compromissos e pede ajuda que, nesse fórum, soluções plausíveis e efetivas sejam tomadas para que a gente assuma aí esses compromissos de fazer essa grande transformação que a cidade precisa. Então, parabéns e agradeço de coração o convite. A gente vai estar junto ainda aí em outros momentos durante o fórum. Eu vou estar participando, grande parte da nossa equipe vai estar participando ativamente para que a gente possa aprender com as experiências, as trocas e os saberes, entendendo que o saber acadêmico, é extremamente necessário, especialmente quando ele está junto do saber popular. E aí a gente que está no poder público, a gente precisa dessa junção de saberes para poder tirar do papel e colocar em prática. E aí eu agradeço de coração, parabenizo a todas e todos, e que nós tenhamos, sim, um excelente fórum de construção, pensando nesse futuro, que é o futuro da humanidade, e que a vida humana acontece, de fato, nas cidades. Gratidão.
Nesse instante, finalizando a mesa de abertura, convidamos o senhor Luiz Carvalho, que é arquiteto, urbanista, PhD na TU Delft, e a partir desse instante também transferindo a moderação desse evento para ele.
Obrigado, Madison. Now we're going to the next section where we're going to have three short presentations. And as you have seen from all the talks before, the expectations are quite high. So I feel very happy to see that all the participants of the workshop are still here, because yeah, the expectations on you on this very short time are quite high. And so we are also a little bit ahead of time. So without further ado, I would like to ask Henk Ovink to start with the first lecture. So the idea here is to have, let's say, I know 15 minutes is quite short, but it would be a nice opportunity to inspire the participants of this workshop and also to raise some questions. What would be the contribution of a new case like Recife into the discussion of climate change and adaptation? And especially in the context of Recife, a city that is very, let's say, divided in social terms, that has a huge impact on the way the city has been developed and built. But without further ado, I would like to ask Henk to start his presentation. So Henk Ovink is the special envoy from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Waters from the Netherlands. And yeah, we're looking forward for your presentation, Henk.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you to all prior introductory comments, especially of also Deputy Mayor. Thanks so much for welcoming us. Eddie Moores, Alain Grimard, Marcela Formiga, Jean-Paul, Roberto and Alfredo. It's an honor for me to address you in 15 minutes. On everything water in the context of Recife, cultural heritage, climate, sustainable development, and a better future. Well, that should not be a hard thing, I guess. I prepared some slides I will share, and I will stick to my 15 minutes. Don't worry, wait. Do you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So we're talking about this, right? Water, our planet, how challenging it is. You also see that for some reasons it's upside down, some might say, but that with a sphere, there is no bottom or top. Although, especially people from Western Europe turn the planet north-south and center on, of course, Europe and the Atlantic, which was not the case how this image was sent back in 1972. Now, cultural heritage does not start in 1972, but it is, again, always good to remember the past. And I show this image to show how important water is for our planet, but also, as you know, how important water is for our coastal cities. And if you know that urbanization is, you know, this is the urban age, is taking a rapid, is taking a rapid trajectory, urbanization on coasts and in deltas is even progressing faster. Hey. You don't see this, or do you?
Oh, we are still on the first slide.
And do you see this? Oh, here. No.
No, we are still on the blue marble.
Yeah, it says sharing is paused.
Oh.
And I click resume share, then it doesn't resume share. Right. Okay.
Maybe you can try stop sharing and sharing again. It's like that.
Yeah. Wow. Sorry. Okay, no, it doesn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work.
It's okay now.
No, it doesn't work. You don't see the children, right? It says it's pausing my share and I have no clue why. I'm very sorry. Okay, I'll do it differently. Don't worry.
Luis, sorry, maybe we could move on and Ink could show after.
Yeah, what I will do it like this.
Okay.
Yeah, so very sorry. I show this. This is a lesson we learned. You see it, I hope.
The workshop
and then
adaptation also, so it's like.
Sorry?
The workshop is also about adaptation and like.
Yeah. So we know that climate change is at the forefront, and of course we learned in this pandemic especially how water is so important for our health, a first line of defense for so many, while at the same time 18, 19, 20, 21 all show us that climate disasters are coming hard at our societies with too much, too little, and polluted water. And it's both. The Netherlands showed massive droughts in the last years, but at the same time floods this summer, and this happening across the world. Extremes become more extreme with every day spent. And it feels like a little bit this. Houston, we have a problem, but 50 plus white male Western people won't solve this, not by themselves, but also not. We need the world, starting from the ground up, to face these challenges. Now, for that, we need to understand, and I want to highlight one report out of these important 4, coming from the IPCC. We had global warming 1.5, we had the cryosphere report, we had recently AR6, the IPCC report that showcases, yes, it is on us, we did it, yes, the window of opportunity is really small, yes, we have to change everything. But the middle report, Climate Change and Land from 2019, is a little bit forgotten. And I really urge you to read it, also in the context of cities, planning, resiliency, adaptation, sustainable development, but also cultural heritage. It shows that the past is not a recipe for the future. 99% of all our investments are increasing climate change and are increasing our vulnerability. Only in 1% can we find salvation or inspiration for better future solutions. So learning from the past takes a different aspect than only looking back. It really means positioning the past in the current and future challenges. And that is a different task. The past can inform, help develop better solutions. But we have to go really deep into our cultural heritage to understand how that works, what those lessons are. Now, we know that cities are at the forefront of climate change. Global Hotspot, Recife is even on this map. It is changing there. It's not only because we live there. It's not only because we have an aggregation of challenges. It also is a financial, an equity, as well as a health risk. Now, if we continue to live like the Netherlands or the United States, we're lost. So there are challenges from a global footprint perspective, and replicating the past will not bring a better future. That is why we have sustainable development goals. That is why we agreed upon a Paris Agreement. That is why business as usual is not only not enough, it's becoming lethal. But that is also true that that past is important to inform decision-making today. But the future, the scenarios, the uncertainties, and how that works should inform our decision-making too. So it's this tension between past and future that gives us a clear pathway where we have to go. And then we have to move away, shy away from non-responsive, even reactive approaches where we're in the midst of vested interests, a replication of mistakes that drives every step. No, we have to become radically proactive and inclusive, comprehensive and sustainably, and really look at the future. Now, water is helpful. It really can become a springboard if we start to understand this better. Because water is connected to everything. Ban Ki-moon always said water is life, and he was very much right, because we need it for equity, equality, for health, for security, we need it for biodiversity, for economy, we need it for everything, and we definitely need it for our cities. The interdependencies between water and almost every SDG showcase how investing in water can have a trickling down effect across all SDGs. With the high-level panel on water report, we said we have to understand that complexity. We have to value water accordingly, and then really looking at all aspects of valuing water. And that means that protecting our natural resources, reconcile values and build trust, embrace the multiple values, educate future generations, and empower and invest and innovate. So valuing water is of critical importance if we want to shy away from the practices of the past. Second, if we want to look ahead, it better be comprehensive, long-term, but matching long-term comprehensive planning with short-term innovative approaches. in this mix between long-term and short-term, it is about partnerships, collaborations, and coalition, inclusion of all, and at the same time in a very transparent and accountable way. So long-term, short-term, innovative approaches that really can help catalyze change in an inclusive way that is accountable and transparent. That is how you build capacity. Capacity that is institutional, that is individual, that even is informal. Now, last, in cities is where we find ourselves, as where the hotspots of challenges are, and it's in these cities, in our deltas along our coast, like Recife is positioned, where the clash between climate, development, social, environmental, cultural, and economic challenges happen. Recife is not the only one that is at the brink of these challenges. We cities from across the world, as I experienced myself with Hurricane Sandy in New York, or as we are experiencing in parts of Asia. I set up a program in Asia called Water as Leverage, a program that really uses the multitude of water's capacity across the SDGs in a process that is innovative, that is creating space, time, and room, safe space or soft space, to ensure that there is the capacity to innovate, to invest in each other and build coalition. And I will show you one example where the past is the reference to the future. This is the city of Chennai. We did an assessment of the water balance. Turns out to be that currently that water balance is totally off. Water falls, it flows in this hardened infrastructure city, pollutes and goes to the sea. The aquifer is depleted and polluted and is becoming more saline. The city is sinking, and there is a negative circular effect. While if you capture that water with nature-based solutions in cultural heritage sites and really restore that balance of capturing water, bringing it back to the aquifer and using it for human consumption and production, there's more than enough water to share. And we looked at the city and the cultural heritage, and this is also how the city was built up. A sloping coastal city where through little embankments, water was held in tanks, and they turned into religious parts, historic religious tanks, where the water was captured, brought back to the aquifer, and used and reused over and over again. With these measures, we restore historic tanks. We even build and expand on that historic learning, new ones, revitalize forests, canals, and bioswales, construct new wetlands, and of course, expand in innovation with solid and liquid waste recycling and more adaptive buildings. And if you do this across such a community, you really look at all aspects of the sustainable development goal. But it takes lessons from the past as well as lessons from the future that you reinvent, innovate, replicate, and bring to scale to ensure that there is a change. And we can start small. We now started the school pilot, and then we scale it up to the city of Chennai, the state of Tamil Nadu, and beyond. I close with the words of Secretary General Guterres, that we have to step up our efforts now. I can conclude in our cities, and by looking and learning from the past, but reinventing that past for a better future. And I look forward to a stimulating debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henk. It's really an effort to condense such an experience in 50 minutes, but we thank you for your input. And we hope you continue until the roundtable at the end. So because of the short of time, I would like to ask Professor Carola Hein to start her presentation. So Carola Hein is a professor in History of Architecture and Urban Planning at Delft University of Technology. And we are looking forward for your presentation.
Yes, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a true pleasure to be here. It's also a true pleasure to follow up on Henk and hopefully introduce and illustrate some of the ideas that Henk has already been discussing. So what I would like to do in my presentation is to make 5 main points, and I've just summarized them here. And I think it's important that we share, both as professionals, but also with citizens, this idea that water is more than H2O, heritage is more than museums, valuing water is more than economics and technology, heritage needs protection and can provide solutions, and that urban deltas and port cities, where we are all located, are the stewards of future water and heritage practices. So what I'm going to try and do in this short presentation is to make a link between the water and the heritage field, both coming together for sustainable development. And I'm going to do that showing you a few examples from around the world, and many of which you already know or are familiar with, but trying to put them into a shared framework. So everybody knows the beautiful city of Venice, and we all think of it as a water city. And there's plenty to learn. So when we look, for example, at these wells inside Venice, and you may have appreciated them for their architectural beauty, but think of them as a heritage solution for future water problems. So the water, the rainwater is collected, it sinks into the ground through sand, and then can be recollected by the users through the wells. So you have a system that is bound in itself, that needs some attention. If salt water gets into it because of flooding, then it needs to be cleaned up. But in itself, it's a very self-contained system. Now, when we think of the bigger water problems in Venice, for example, Acqua Alta, then we actually have to think about the entire lagoon. And I think that is one of the big issues that we need to address. Water is a system. It's a spatial system, it's a social system, it's a cultural system. So we can only understand the World Heritage Site of Venice if we take into account the entire lagoon with all its islands, with its different levels of seawater, and including the big port of Marghera, for example, in the background, because we need to take into account the shipping channels. We need to take into account the various outlet and even the Mose, which is going to protect the city from further sea level rise. So getting this general message out that we are talking about water not just as a faucet or a well, but as a very big comprehensive system, I think is very important. And in that context, we need to renaturalize the salt marshes, for example, but we also need to take into account what we see on the other side, which is the large port of Marghera. So water becomes this connector between culture and nature, and a place where we can connect actually both of them and think about a sustainable future. So that gets me to my second point, which is about, heritage being more than musea. And what I mean with this is that there are lots of path dependencies that are changing how we engage with water today. So there is plenty of nice documentation, and let's just take an example here from the Netherlands about the Count Willem II already in 1255 granting rights for a slice to the local dijkgraaf, the person in charge of it. And we can observe this as historical documents, but we can also see it as something that shaped the ways in which we think today. So we can see this as a beautiful map of an area in the Netherlands, how the different polders are set up, where water is distributed, and which will tell us a lot about which area of the Netherlands needs the next area to get rid of its water, for example. But we can also see it as a foundation for what is happening today and a way to think with it. So what I was just showing you is directly connected to the World Heritage Site of Kinderdijk, where windmills have been used to take the water out of the polder, the deep lying areas, into the nearby river. Now, this system with changing water conditions has been altered in a way that today, to keep those windmills as a heritage site healthy, we need to actually pump water back into the polder so that the wooden foundations are not disappearing. So keeping these windmills in the beginning was part of the daily life of a whole population of millers and their families who lived there. Today, it is part of a different group of stakeholders, of heritage institutions, of municipalities, and etc. So these kinds of changes in the way of groups that use these buildings and their structures, I think is very important to fully understand. And to make one more illustration of this point of who is involved, how and where, and how does this work, let me show you this example. So nice heritage site in the city of Gouda. This is an old water mill for wool. And so this mill was one of two that was using water from the river to drive its machines. Now, this water that was driving the machines was going into the polder, so these low-lying areas like Kinderdijk that I just showed you. And it took 5 windmills to get the water back out. So you can really imagine that there were lots of disputes between the people using the water for energy and the people who had to use energy to get the water back out. And it actually took several hundred years to get that problem solved. So just looking at a building will not tell us enough about water management. So we really need to look at the bigger scale to understand the full meaning of the heritage. And this heritage has also changed over time. So the windmills that we saw, and which can be seen as very sustainable wind-driven energy generators, were replaced by steam engines like this, the Wisbaum pumping station, which took over from many of the windmills in the area. Now, these are nice heritage sites today, but we also have problems with these heritage sites. For example, the Woudergemaal, another pumping station to keep the Netherlands dry, is actually driven by petroleum. So how can we make an argument about heritage and climate change and arguing that our heritage sites should contribute to sustainable development if at the same time we want to show the original functioning of this pumping station, which is actually petroleum. So there's a lot of conflicts in this context. And I think we need to realize that water management itself is a heritage practice. And if we can make that clearer and help people understand how water management has historic roots, which part of the historic roots are influencing our thinking for the future. Thanks for that thumb up. Which part of our thinking is inspired by the past, which ones we want to continue, which ones we don't want to continue, and what that means for our heritage. I think that's very important. And that gets me to the point of valuing water being more than just technology or economics. We need to have a new water awareness. And for that, it might be good to also look at cultural practices around the world and to see how they are embedded in everyday, even spiritual practices. So here, for example, was the opening of a rebuilding of a small river at the Arimount. Of the historical practices that we can think of, the beautiful stepped water tanks can only function if the society and the way we live is aligned with it. So we need to have this awareness, as I said, on water management and the institutional structures around it. And we have to have awareness of the cultural practices around it. And we may think that these are less prominent in Europe, but let's also remember that, coming back to Venice, many of our historical paintings were intertwined with here representing Venice as being offered gifts. So she's a queen being offered gifts from Neptune, for example. And maybe there's even a time to look at historical paintings through the lens of water. And I can see a great exhibition on that topic emerging and maybe capturing also the inspiration for water management around the world. So heritage, as I said before, needs protection. We can learn from it, and it can actually help sustainable development if we look at it carefully. And we cannot say everything from the past is good, but we can think about what were the conditions for those buildings, institutions, and cultures in the past, and how can that relate to the present. I really like the example of the canats, for example, here in Algeria, which were, and you just see the manholes of a system driven purely by gravity to irrigate land over large distances through these shafts. Now we have the problem that today nobody will want to live or work in these kinds of conditions anymore. So we have to find other solutions. But to have been able in a place like Iran to keep ice over the entire summer is pretty impressive. So we have the knowledge to do it. And this is part of the larger initiative with ECOMOS and many other partners, point out how heritage, water and heritage have been connected, are and will be connected in the future. And I would like to make a brief point about the historic urban landscape approach from UNESCO, which I think is proposing a networked idea towards heritage, which is exactly in line with what we also need for water, which is by itself a network. So that's where these two elements of water as a network, water as a system, and heritage as a system actually meet. And I think if we can agree on that, then we have a way forward. And in this context, I think that urban deltas and port cities can play an important role. Urban deltas, port cities are at the forefront of climate change. They've been agents of it, and they will be the first to be underwater. So there are other places that have long shown a lot of innovative power. Port cities have driven all kinds of transformations, and these are the kinds of changes we want to prevent. But do we want to do it in the way of new islands, huge dikes? So do we want to continue this value of resistance, resisting water, or do we need to come up with a new way of resilience, such as in the Netherlands with the Room for the River project? Give the river the place it needs when it needs it, rather than trying to confine it. So I'm arguing for an approach towards the land from the sea as the common good, and not a land-based approach in the first place. And we need new tools to actually analyze and understand. For example, we are now working on geospatial mapping to illustrate the transformation of port and cities hand in hand. And what you can learn from this kind of a mapping approach to the past is how has the relation between sea and land changed? What are the institutional boundaries? What are the areas in this case where the port is located? So I think ports will play an important role in this conversation. So in this case, you can say in Rotterdam, the port has always led. In Hamburg, it has always been a pair of port and city working together. In London, the port has basically left the city. And once you understand who the main actors are, what the path dependencies are from that determine where we are today, I think it will be easier to develop future solutions. So in line with the workshop, I think there are a number of questions that could be asked, also to refine our ideas of valuing water. So when the water patterns are changing, the maritime industry may be quite happy because they can go around the northern route, for example, but it means our heritage will be underwater. We can think about introducing higher walls, higher dikes, but what does that mean for the ecosystem and for the integration of nature and culture? We can think about new circular practices, but can we also learn from the old ones, and how do the two intersect? We've established a lot of public water systems that are great to avoid uneven water distribution, but they also have a lot of negative implications. Think even about conflicts between Egypt and its neighbors. So we can go on, and what we've tried to do with this small presentation is to find these clashes that are actually happening around water, local water practices, larger scale, national scale water practices, modern technology, intensive farming versus small-scale agriculture, even questions of mobility, particularly for port cities, whether we use trucks and to go through the cities, or whether we can put more transportation on ships. So to end with, maybe one of the questions we need to answer is in the concept of valuing water. Also, what degree do we pay to cultural values or consumption? And I would like to end here with our call for the free online course that we are starting in November, which is called Water Works. Anybody interested, feel free to sign up. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carola, for this very impressive efforts to put a lot of information into 15 minutes. And yeah, we'll be happy to discuss it further after at the round table. But I think for the sake of time, because Paula also has to leave in a few minutes, to ask Paula to start presentation. So Paula Vigano is a professor of urban theory and urban design at the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, but also at the UAV Venice. And so Paula, if you...
Yeah, thank you. Luisa, do you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I've been asked to, but first of all, thanks for the invitation. Very happy, and the topics are really great to discuss. And it's the only pity is that the time is so short. But I've been asked to speak of Venice. Carola has already introduced the theme. And I would like to speak of Venice as a planetary metaphor. So Venice, as you see, is here. And if you want to start to look at the challenges, the issues that are related to water and Venice, you need really to take a bigger scale. For example, you need to understand that was our first way to connect to the complexity of the water risks and management in Venice. You have to start to understand the inland territory and all the possibility that are still there to reduce the impact of the inland waters towards the lagoon. So you need to enlarge, to start thinking to this type of diffuse city. You start to connect the decreased ice coverage that we will face in the future, and also the sea level rise on the other side, so between mountains and land, and taking in consideration the topography, the low topography that characterize the land around Venice. You have to understand that Venice is this enormous hydraulic machine where all the islands in the lagoon are only one small part inside this enormous system of water management that I'm not going to. So you have to understand how the different type of soils, lithologies, type of slopes, etc. The man-made interventions that are since millennials. And finally, to reframe this section from the mountains until the sea with different strategies that I'm not going to present. You can find many of what I'm saying in these three books: The Extreme City, Landscapes of Water, and Asphalt. Maybe just one point, for sure, this has been a way to read the territory and to unveil rationalities, territorial rationalities, and work on multitask design. Then once we have tried to diminish, let's say, the risk arriving from the outside, then we can concentrate a little bit on the lagoon and all the conditions that are related to the very important modification. In the past, we are speaking here of centuries long works to divert the rivers from the lagoon. You understand when the diversions were operated in order to diminish this impact of the inland on the lagoon. Just a word, this is the work I realized with the students of the European Master in Urbanism. You see the people, the name of the students here, and also to understand how people are living in this very spatial environment, and where water and say everyday practices are always connected. What is important first is starting to discuss with all the experts that are studying Venice as a really an extreme case, is that there are clearly, let's say, tip moment and tip points. We consider that if we will not remain inside the plus 50 centimeters in relation to the actual situation, it will be very difficult to save Venice. So the first fundamental point arises is that if you want to save Venice, you have to save the planet. If you want to save Venice, you have to reduce the impact of climate change. That is a fundamental point, very simple, but very and strategic. But if we speak of plus 50 centimeters, we speak of high tides of 1.30 meters. If we go further than that, it will be quite impossible, let's say, to save Venice. And then you understand that there is a fundamental tool that the lagoon provides in order to diminish the waves, the strength of the waves, in order to maintain and to diminish the erosion of the lagoon. That is the barene, so this vegetation in situations where you are between water and sand and soil. And you see here the reduction of the barene that today are just the black part in respect to the 16th century. So there has been a continuous erosion of the amount of those barene. And here you see also the impact of all the transformation that have considered the space of the lagoon as a productive space, as a space where you could, for example, construct a big harbor, because this is, for example, all the part related to the harbor. You see the amount of space that it has taken on the lagoon, and the disparition of the barene vegetation. Here in this section, you see the presence of the canals. The canals are fundamental elements of the erosion of the lagoon. So in principle, you should renounce to the depth of certain depth of the canals. You see a lot of the transformation, but especially again the harbor here, and also the three mouths. The three mouths that were introduced with the actual depth or close to the actual depth by Napoleon. So until Napoleon, there were not so very deep canals, and that's something that we have to understand, that Napoleon did this in the idea of the exploitation of the lagoon and of the harbor of the lagoon. And here we see an idea of blurring perimeters of the lagoon that has been more and more rigidly defined as a space, that maybe we should start to reconnect to something larger without clear perimeters. And also you see here the different elements that they contribute to the problems of Venice. For example, the wind that in some cases are really pushing the waters inside the lagoon. Of course, we will need much more time to describe this, but we have analyzed three scenarios related to the lagoon. The first is a scenario that is discussed seriously. For the Dutch, I think this is not nothing new, but there is the idea to close the lagoon. Of course, you will lose completely the environment of the lagoon. A second scenario, that is the one to accept that there are parts of the lagoon that are already today almost sea bays. In particular, this part, that is one where the big canals are passing in order to serve the port of Marghera. So one position, I'm talking of scientific positions, like in the previous case, would be to separate the northern part of the lagoon with a wall of some type, to let this opening here work to maintain the harbor, and then eventually to have a hybrid condition in the southern part, or eventually close also the southern part. The two scenarios have a lot of problems. I have not the time to tell you all the impacts that this scenario could have, but you can lose, for example, an ecosystem in the first case. You don't know what will be. In fact, you don't know really the impact of dividing the lagoon in three parts and the one in the center becoming a piece of sea. So we concentrated more on this scenario that is proposed by another part of the scientists that are working on the lagoon, in which you have in fact to imagine to renaturalize the lagoon to strengthen the lagoon as a natural protection device, to stop the sediment outflow and the salinization of too much saline lagoon. You have to fill the three inlets of the Venetian lagoon that you see here in red. The jetties that you also see have been realized that are accelerating. In fact, the inlets in the Venetian lagoon are also destroyed. Sorry, that are accelerating the water exchange and outflow of sediments. You have to imagine that the port will not be inside the lagoon. It will be maybe outside of the lagoon or maybe somewhere else. There are ports close to Venice, so it's not the only one. So you will not dredge the canals anymore. And let's say you have probably to re-put some rivers into the lagoon in order to have an apport of sediments inside the lagoon. And when you have made all this, then you can reconstruct the barrene and this type of wetland vegetation. And this can also help in the sedimentation process. So altogether, all this barrene and the other elements that constitute the lagoon will act as natural breakwaters. And finally, this reduction of the section of the inlets would lower the peak value of exceptional tidal events. As you can understand, this scenario does not deal with the social and economic sustainability, but this environmental sustainability. And in this vision, the city of Venice and the other islands would need to progressively adapt to the rising sea level. So again, we need mitigation strategies of different types at a different scale, at the planetary scale, in order not to go beyond the 50 centimeters of sea level rise, and all this intervention on the lagoon. You will need also more space to consider this larger lagoon, so to renounce to some of the reclaimed land that are around the lagoon. And this could be another image of the lagoon where you don't see anymore the limits as they are today very well defined, but something really blurring into the territory. I'm going a little bit faster because I think otherwise we will not see anything. So at this point, I would like to share with you a video, if I can get out of this for a moment. A small video that we have realized because when you are at that point, you understand that you are not really exactly into the actual reality, in the actual situation. You need to take a step further that we have called amphibia. So we have imagined together with the students, with 3 students of the European Master in Urbanism, Flor Guichot, Nathan, I don't remember the family name, and Francesco again, Lombardi. We have worked on a utopia that we have called Amphibia, and I would like to show you some images of this video. So I know that I have to share video, so let's hope that it works. Okay, and I don't know if you see something here. I go to not to the beginning. Okay, so the scientists at the end, they tell us this. Okay, I cannot tell you how to save Venice. I hope that everything's working.
Yes, it is.
In these times of uncertainty, times in which we only know that we don't know, let me tell you about Amphibia. Amphibia is a place at the confluence of different environments, where the rivers arrive from the mountain through the flatland and merge with the sea, creating a unique in-between landscape, shaped by both natural flows and human interventions. When the sea level rose, cities in the world decided to resist, while the people of Amphibia continue what they have always done, adapt to the gradually changing condition. Eventually, an equilibrium state was reached when planetary awareness stopped emission and pollution. Some radical steps were taken to adapt and safeguard the lagoon. First, the people of Amphibia destroyed the jetties towards the sea to stop heavy erosion, then laying the rubbles on the seabed to shallow the inlets to cover their rigid and obsolete protection system. They also removed the industrial port, harmful to the fragile lagoon ecosystem. Then, citizens of Amphibia opened up their landscape, rediverted rivers, and gave lowlands that belonged to the lagoon back to water. Finally, after being entirely lost, they restored marshlands and tidal flats, tempering forces of water, which makes the amphibian archipelago inhabitable. In Amphibia, everything that can be produced is produced. Water is the isotopic carrier of the territory. It is the binding element, enabling flows of people, energy, food, and goods. This is what I knew before coming to Amphibia. I was sent here to understand how these people manage what none other could, to adapt to the rhythm of tides, and acknowledge the permanent presence of water. I arrived in Amphibia where the rivers meet the lagoon, the low-lying polders, a vast, extensive waterscape structured by system of ditches and embankments, reminder of a productive past. I was told that these territories, once torn from the lagoon and dried for cultivation, were given back to the water. As far as my eyes could reach, the plain was a productive wetland, in which higher and lower platforms were molded through earthworks to cultivate in an environment of tidal fluctuations. It is here that aqua farmers, anchored to the existing lines in the landscape, farm crabs and mussels, experiment with floodable crops on the higher ground, and breed fishes in the lower basins. This intermediate landscape extends to the northern lagoon as a place of manufactured nature, cleaning the river that enter Amphibia, and a breeding ground for all sorts of species. At the confluence, some islands emerge, both part of the archipelago and connected to the mainland, where dikes and the water system overlap. From here, I entered the lagoon. Some people were taking care of the wetlands. As I later discovered, constant work is put into the maintenance of the environment, orchestrated by the magistrates of the waters. I arrived on the island of New Old Thames, known for its history of glass production, which left behind an industrial heritage of warehouses and workshops. People of Amphibia realized their value and transformed them into new workspaces devoted to the local production. The old and polluting glassmaking decayed, emptying many of the industries, and new purposes had to be found for these structures. Some warehouses along the channels were reconverted, adapting the ground floors to the changing water levels. Small boats move in and out to supply the goods. I understood that in Amphibia, resources are scarce, demanding for circular processes. It is here that I saw craftsmen and manufacturers make and repair as much as they can. Behind the frenzy of production, the island is easeful. Houses are organized around orchards, where older people meet young artists, artisans and students, attracted by the available workspaces. At the far end of the island, a vast park extends toward Amphibia's tree nursery, an old landfill. It is here that the new generation of glassmakers restructured around the collective furnaces. I sat down and realized how calm it is here. People of Amphibia walk or move on water, by kayak, rowing or small electrical boat, but also thanks to the water buses. The capital of Amphibia is a place of gathering to celebrate the culture of the lagoon. It is an incredibly dense city, organized in nuclei by channels as an archipelago within the archipelago. Each nucleus relates differently to the tidal movement, some dry, some flooded a few times during the fall, and some even flooded every day. I was told that the capital used to endure a touristic mono-economy, emptying the city of its residents due to the growing conflict with the visitors. But then came the planetary pandemic, which opened the eyes of the people of Amphibia, who realized they could no longer rely only on tourism. Progressively, through tax incentive, housing policies, and reorganization of tourism, a new inflow of population revitalized and reorganized the capital. No longer a simulacrum, but a dynamic place, the city opened up vacant spaces, the lights of which catered to the changing needs of businesses and facilities. During my stay, one of the exceptional high tide reached the capital. The high nuclei were not affected. Here, the stunning large public spaces pay tribute to the pedestrian nature of the capital. And the half-dry nuclei, while I witnessed the tides invading the square, citizens seem to be rather impassive. Urban spaces and ground floors are designed and maintained to cope with the daily flooding. In the lowest nuclei, regular or exceptional tides make no difference. Here, the ground floors are surrendered to the water, while passerelle define a dense superimposition of pedestrian and water movement.
I stop here because it's a little bit long. I think that you have understood the sense of this work. And in synthesis, maybe I wanted to quote maybe some other interesting aspect. For example, Italo Calvino, the very important Italian writer, writing about Venice as the city of the future, and imagining that in the future the water cities will be more and more the fundamental cities in the world, and imagining that there will be many Venices, more than what they exist today in the future. So in synthesis, as I said, if we want to save Venice, we have to save the planet. There is no other possibility. As you know, the Mose worked for one time. So one high tide was blocked by the Mose, but the second one, not, because the Mose didn't work. It was not open for reasons that are not completely clear, but one of the reasons is that it's very expensive to open frequently the Mose. So you understand that the Mose will not be the solution. To save Venice, you have to save the planet. In that sense, Venice is a planetary metaphor. If by saving the planet, you can contain the sea level rise, then you can explore in deep the concept of resilience. Resilience is not just a deformation, the possibility to return back, is fundamentally the capacity to accept the phenomenon and to cope with the phenomenon, which means that you have really to work, as the Republic of Venice always worked, on this dynamic balance and this trial and errors procedure with the intervention that could be reverted back. So nothing definitive, but always solution that you can dismantle easily. And this dynamic balance has to be continuously rediscussed and reconstructed. And to do this, you need a lot of care, a lot of attention to the territory, a lot of work in the territory. You need a collective governance and not only an institutional and public governance. And you will work as Venice worked for centuries, almost 2 millennia, on the infinite reuse of the existing. When the big tower in Piazza San Marco at the beginning of the 20th century crashed down, the foundations that were there since 800 years were found to be in perfect state. So the infinite reuse of the existing, which was in fact and is in fact the bed of the reversible and symbiotic evolutions between man and the lagoon will be the fundamental occupation for people living in Venice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much. And yeah.
Maybe just a word, sorry, yes. Luis, the video is in the exhibition also at the Venice Biennale, and we will find a way to make it also more public, let's say, in the future.
Yeah, I have shared the video already with
okay, good, so it's better.
Yeah, and I think you cannot stay until the roundtable. Is that correct? Or
I cannot. I can stay 10 minutes more.
So I will just break a little bit the order of the sequence of the presentations, just to as you're still here, if you could give a suggestion, what would be a powerful image, or what would be let's say a good result of 1 week of workshop to somehow reach the citizens and all the stakeholders of Recife? What would be your suggestion?
You mean to give an image to bring home? You mean something like that?
Yeah, yes. Like after 1 week of discussion that was going to continue, this conversation between the Netherlands and Brazil, discussing Recife at first, but then, as you've seen in the first presentations, there's quite a lot of expectation about delivering something or delivering ideas for the future of the city.
Well, I don't know because I don't know what we are going to do, and I don't know Recife enough to say something specific. I don't think that we have to look for totalizing images. The only point I would clearly put in the foreground is to reflect more seriously on resilience. Resilience, if we want to be resilient, this will affect our way of living, our way of maintaining the territories, our way of transforming them. And I think that we have to simply avoid easy solutions, and to admit, as it is the case of Venice, that eventually there will be no solution. And if there is no solution, I think that our attitude has to change, and that there is not the idea of easy going out. Now we have to work on this. We have to adapt, and maybe we have to look at this with open eyes, and not as we always do by closing our eyes and trying to get the easiest way to exit the and in fact we have certain cities, and maybe Recife is one of them. Venice is for sure, and some Dutch cities that should really act as prototypes, as exemplary places where, because it's so extreme the situation, you can really go deep in understanding the idea of resilience, because you are obliged to do that. In other places, this will not be necessary, but here, and I think also in Recife, it is probably necessary to accept the phenomenon and imagine that you have to coexist with it.
I couldn't agree more, Paola. I can't put on my camera, but I couldn't agree more. And I think this urgency of mitigation, 1.5 degree in the context of adaptation, is of critical importance. It's a matter of survival, and for places like the Netherlands, Italy, with Venice, Recife, and others, it is not top of the agenda. But if you turn it around, and if you actually, hey, if the world doesn't stick to the 1.5 degree promise, we can forget about the Netherlands and Venice and Recife.
Exactly.
And it gets a totally different meaning. Important. Yeah, it's existential. But there's a lack of political awareness, societal awareness, awareness among decision makers, investors, businesses, that it actually works that way. And then the other way around, if these forefronts of climate change impacts can help us understand what that then means, then we can fast track the implementation, because they come from places where the possibility for change, investment, and innovations are clearly there, but there's a hesitance. The whole debate on loss and damage is crazy in this context. This is not a global South problem, not at all. So, exactly. It is, but not only. Yeah. So thanks very much for making it so explicitly clear, and it's great to see you again.
Thank you. I hope, Henke, that we can continue this discussion, because I think that is something that is really touching closely. It's really the core of the problem we have today, this problem of surviving and adapting. And you see in this kind of miniature cases, you see all the complexity of all the contradictions, all the ambiguities, but also you understand the fact that that in fact those cities are those in which, since the most time, those themes are fundamental. Yeah. And we have lost something. And of course, I'm not imagining that you are going back to the Venice of the Doge. That's not the point. But for sure, we have to understand an attitude, a way of living with your environment that we have completely forgotten.
Yeah, we lost it. Yeah.
And I think,
and where the risk is always there. It's always there, and you live with it. Yeah. You don't hide it. It's there.
And maybe to add one more dimension to it, because I think, Paula, what you also show is the power of images, because you could both turn it around and say this is a positive future, but you could also illustrate the negative future, which would be all of the Dutch moving almost to the German border or beyond. And then you get into a different story. But visualizing these kinds of things are also very, very important, I think. So that's another great contribution. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And I would like to highlight just a small thing, is that you showed also with the example of Venice, that is learning how to deal with the change. It's already present, is already part of the let's say, the routine of a part of the population. So there's one part of the population that has learned how to live with that, has dealt with that in a different way. Yeah. So also in the presentation from Carol about how to learn from the past, but I think also in the case of Recife, the past is not like something that has stopped there. Like, we still have people sharing the same practices that they use in the past and how to deal with this situation, and we are somehow closing an eye to this type of
And also, I think that these 2 points that are also underlined by the main historians working on Venice and the lagoon, the fact that the care of the territory, that's also something similar also in Holland. The care of the territory constructs a specific society, that has a specific idea of what does it mean to be collective, to make things together. And they reuse, the infinite reuse, knowing that in Venice it was very difficult to construct new soil where you could make new buildings. And for centuries, Venice did not have the problem of expansion. The problem of Venice was to maintain a certain equilibrium. not to expand, but to maintain this delicate equilibrium that was the possibility of Venice, for Venice to exist.
And maybe one more thought to add to this. You said nicely, let's move the port out of the lagoon. And we just had an event at in Venice for the Bauhaus of the Seas with this idea. How do you balance those different interests? How do you value those interests, the economic interests, all the people who are still shopping and getting the big container ships across? And how do we deal with that kind of intricate different values of the stakeholders in the lagoon?
Yes, but Carola, really, we have to understand the dimension of the problem. A port is nothing in respect to the dimension of the problem. To be even more explicit, the Minister of Infrastructure has launched a competition on a new a new external port to the lagoon. They have already launched a competition, which means that this idea start to work. And as you know, there are many ports close to Venice, so there is not a really fundamental point. The point, the port of Venice and the say Marghera, we will need centuries to get rid of the problems created by the idea of putting a harbor inside the lagoon. I can say that, of course, this was a fundamental moment of the change of the image of Venice from a declining, almost dead city to a city of the future, the modern city. But in fact, the results are devastating. So this harbor can be a small harbor and can have something outside, close or a little bit more far away. We have to start. This is resilience. I'm sorry. Otherwise, we are not speaking of resilience. We are just stubbornly there in our resistant mood. But I don't know how many times we will have to see that this Mose one day is working, but maybe the other day is not. So how many times we will have to leave this story, which you don't know, in fact. And what if the Mose has to remain open for too much time, and then in any case, the harbor will not work because it will be closed, in fact, the lagoon. So, I mean, there are so many contradictions in all the system of big infrastructures that I think we are legitimized to rethink this and to discuss. Otherwise, we have to accept what the scientists are telling us. There is no solution for Venice.
That's a very clear message, and like how the faith on big infrastructure, on big planning, like can somehow be not fulfilled. Like, because in the case of Venice, how long it took before the Mose was really implemented, like how long between planning and
50 years of discussion, 50 years of discussion,
and how many more years will
years
be
of construction.
Yeah, but how many more years will be necessary to discover that actually it's not working? The solutions worse than the problem.
But there are no single focused infrastructure solutions to these climate and sustainable projects. We come from, I would say, perhaps even 100 years of a problem, got a solution, and then we postponed the result of that stupidity, and we got time from nature and our planet because there was room for making those mistakes. But that room is gone with climate change, overpopulation, biodiversity loss, and so forth. All of a sudden, we're in a lock-in where we find ourselves that the time of postponing the impact of our stupid decision makings in single focused solutions is hitting back at us right now, not
because
in
there
the
is
future.
Also, and there is also another point that because it took 50 years. Also, it was not clear why it was like that, why the height was that. Scientists do not understand, for example, why it was chosen that height. Now it's clearly already not enough. So it can work maybe for a while, for some moments, but it is not a final solution. It's not the definitive solution in any case.
And it's a single focus solution for a past problem and not a comprehensive approach to future challenges. So it's fair.
I'm very sorry. I have to go.
I have to go
I have a train, and I hope we can continue this conversation. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paolo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Take care.
And, the idea was to have this roundtable at the end of the presentations, after the presentations of Recife, but we can still save some discussions to the end. I hope, Carola, you can still stay with us.
Yeah, I can stay. I will.
And that will be nice, because then we are now going to the more specific case of Recife. And I would like to ask Moacir Araújo to start with his presentation. And I know it's really quite of a challenge to take control of time here with such a interesting discussion. So I'm sorry, I apologize for the audience because we are a little bit late, but it's well justified, I hope.
Okay. No, thank you for this very exciting discussion. It was very, very good to hear about that and to be able to be there. I mean, so I'd like to bring to you some ideas about Recife and how Recife became a hotspot of vulnerability for sea level highs. And I think that in the case of Recife, I'm trying to move on. Okay. I think that in the case of Recife, we should take into account two aspects. The major geophysical forcing, I mean, how Recife is placed in concerning the circulation and so on, and also the local elements of vulnerability. It's really the combination between these aspects that bring Recife to one of the top for vulnerability in sea level rise in Brazil. So here in the left side, you have the circulation, the general circulation of the tropical Atlantic. So we may say that we have more black arrows coming from the Africa to the South America, to Recife and Brazil, than the opposite. So this is already a very common circulation in the Atlantic. And in the right side, we have the sea surface high. So the red region mean that we are more surface high in the Atlantic. So we receive a lot of warm and salt water from the Indian Ocean. And what we see is that in the last 3 decades that we are receiving more and more water from the Indian Ocean that's warming, is the ocean that is warming faster in the globe. So, and this water is crossing the basin, coming to the western boundary. And in the right side low panel, we will have that we still are accumulating water in the western boundary, and the place that we call the Southwestern Atlantic warm pool. So another aspect comes from the wind-induced transport. It's still a geophysical forcing that brings in the south hemispheres the transport of waters, what we call the Ekman pumping and the Ekman transport from the east to the west. So what we have is that as stronger is the wind, as more water will be bring from the east to the west in the south hemisphere. So we have some kind of upwelling in the east and downwelling in the western boundary, and we have a stacking of water mass nearby the Recife region. And in the left side, what you see also with the climate change is that in any data set you can use, you may see that wind is becoming stronger in that region. So we can expect also that we will have more and more water arriving and stacking in the front of Recife, for example. And a third point for the geophysical forcing comes from the thermal expansion. When you warm the water, the water expands. So we have really in the tropics a very critical situation where we have a warming, and in the Atlantic in general for two different, but we may focus on the RCP 8.5 and the last ocean and cryosphere report from IPCC. We see that we will have 2 degrees Celsius warming water, and by the end of the century. So this is another aspect that should be taken in consideration. In fact, what I'm trying to say is that we are not really in the best side of the ocean, you know, and to change that is not impossible to do, because even if you can stop climate change, we cannot stop the planet to rotate. So we have really a problem, a geophysical problem that we should live with. And for the sea level rise, what we have also is that as close as we have nowadays, we have fast increase of sea level rise. This is very clear from the last IPCC report last August, and it also very clear from the oldest, the ancient report, and that we have analyzed and studied. So, sorry, I stopped here, but are you see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, we are back with you.
Okay, that's good. So coming to Recife itself, you know, coming to local Recife. Recife is in Delta. It's in the Deltaic region. We have some features that is very hard to deal with, because we have a very low average altitude, only 2 to 4 meters above the mean sea level. We have flat areas bordered by coastal plain, high runoff, high level of groundwaters, and mangrove, a strong process of mangrove land filling and impermeabilization of soil in Recife. So all the features, the local features, do not happen as well. And another thing that you should take into consideration is the anthropic pressure. Here we have the distribution of the number of inhabitants per square kilometer along the Brazilian coast. And you may see that Pernambuco, now we have more than 1,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. It's a very strong, by the way, it's the strongest along the Brazil. We have a very short coastline and a lot of concentration and activity in this part of Brazil, in Recife. So I studied that we performed just before the last IPCC report, I mean in 2013, about that. 3 main questions, 3 main answers. What would be the flood areas if we combine extreme events and strong winds and possible scenario for sea level rise? We're talking about flooding areas. To what degree are the beaches able to fulfill the protection of allocated resources, and which are the coastal resources that are in risk? So concerning flooding area, we worked with two different scenarios, looking to the end of the century. So it took about a half meter and 1 meter and for the sea level height. Took also a special attention in the coastal areas and the estuarine areas. In the coastal area, we make a combination between gravitational forces, I mean tides and meteorology and sea level rise. And in estuarine areas, only tides and sea level rise, because it's more protected from the wind. And what we have is here is some example that what we can have in Recife by the end of the century. And the right side, the blue area is the overwashed, we would say, area, you know, the flood area in Recife. And this corresponds more or less to 16% of the area of the Recife municipality. So it's really huge. I would say we're talking about 30 square kilometers that will be washed at least 2-3 times a year. So, and now what we have is about the coastline vulnerability. We work with the backshore width. It's the difference between the line of the sea on the beach and the line of the first edification, you know? So we call LPP. So this is the backshore width. And on the right side, we're trying to evaluate how much money we have at risk concerning, and for that we use the habitation tax, what we call here in Brazil the IPTU tax, you know. So we try to evaluate that. And for the coastline vulnerability, so we have 3 situations. We have the zero, I mean that we have already some kind of protective structures on the coastline. We are already in the yellow zone. We have a low vulnerability. I mean, when we have more than 30 meters, is not a lot, I would say, but more than 30 meters, the distance between the beach, the edifications, the constructions, and the sea line, and high vulnerability, when you have less than 30 meters, the red one. So what we saw is that most of 50% of the coastline Recife is already under protection, you know? And if you take into account the high vulnerable line, and also the place where we have already some kind of structure for protections, we reach more than 80% of the Recife. So this is really a lot, I would say, already. And we also performed some numerical simulation looking to the future. And here is some example for the RCP 8.5, I mean, and the representative concentration pathway. I mean, that's the situation where I would say that you are close, okay? We are already very close from the RCP 8.5, which means 8.5 watts per square meter of radiation, and more than we have today. And we use that to identify some energetical regions where we can have really problems. So you have all the beach of Boa Viagem, Piedade, as well as close the downtown city of Recife. And finally, the last slide, I would say that unfortunately, the most vulnerable area is the downtown, okay? Exactly where we have the historical cultural patrimony, and we have all this beautiful Recife is unfortunately the most vulnerable area by the end of the century. So we'll need to take care. I would say that I think that resilience, it's a very, very important concept, and I like very much to be part of the discussion and to listen what have been mentioned by other colleagues before me. So that's the big picture I bring to you. So what's the take-home message is that it's not only a case of a specific Recife. It's a case because Recife and the western boundary of the Atlantic is really under strong forces that are increasing with climate change. Thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you, Professor Moussi. And so we can go to the last but not least with Paul Meurs, please. If you can start sharing your...
Yes, hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I also have some slides prepared. And I was asked to give a short reflection on the Netherlands perspective of the challenge of the rising sea levels in Recife. which doesn't mean that it will be a perspective of solutions, as we have heard before. I think the sense of urgency was very clear from all the previous contributions, but also the fact that no easy solutions can be found. But the interesting thing about sharing experiences and working together, of course, is that you share your creativity and you look at the things at your own reality from a different perspective. So I just want to show some slides, which I took in Recife, some images, and then some of the experiences we have in the Netherlands, which might be relevant as reference cases for the workshop this week. Let's see if I can get it moving. Yeah. This is a historic Dutch map of Recife in the 17th century. And what you can see is that the Dutch choose the most Dutch landscape of Pernambuco to found their capital city. It's a lot of water. It's a delta of rivers. And it really reminds one, except for the tropical condition and the water thing at the sea, it reminds a little bit of the conditions in the Netherlands. So in the middle of this swampy area, the capital city was founded, Mauritsstad, next to the port of Recife, with a palace on the one side and a fortress on the other side, really a strategic delta where a colonial city shaped. Nowadays, that same area is still visible as the delta. You can recognize the cultural landscape, but all the buildings of the Dutch colonial city have gone. So the inheritance is not so much in the physical heritage, but the water itself really is the heritage of that era. It's the condition of the delta, which is urbanized. And as you can see, all the islands have grown bigger. There's less water than in the past. Still, there's a lot of water in the downtown of Recife. And a whole metropolis took shape in this area. Water is the heart of the city. And if you go onto the water, you really feel almost a glimpse of the past. This is the Governmental Palace in the very heart of the center of Recife, seen from the water. And on the left, you have an image of the palace, which was there in the Dutch era. The palace is gone, but the site is still there and recognizable. But for me as a Dutch, the big shocking thing about Recife, about the water city of Recife, is that nobody goes on the water. So hardly anybody will ever see this image. What you see in Recife is that everybody literally turns its back to the river, and the city is trying to ignore almost the fact that there is also a delta. So the city closed in itself is next to it a delta. Even at the bridges, this is one of the bridges in the old town, the Mauritius Bridge. You don't even see the water if you're in the city. It's really amazing. Once you cross those bridges, then you get a panorama. You get a window on the river system, but it's almost like something exotic, something outside of the city. Along the rivers, the city has grown, and you have some of the rich areas of Recife. And again, all these areas are fragments of a city disconnected from the water. The transit is in between. The mangroves and the rivers itself are hardly visible, are hardly connected to the city. Only the margins of the city have their home in the river basins as these palafita housing things. And water in Recife is very much the area of the margin and of the sanitational problems the city is still facing. So for me as a Dutch, it's really, there's so much water in Recife, but it's hardly any positive contribution or any presence in the daily life of the city. So there's a big metropolis next to a delta, and they live next to each other. So if we move to the Netherlands and to the question which I got, the challenge of the rising sea levels in Recife seen in the Dutch perspective. I think there's some references I want to bring in from our Dutch reality into the workshop. And the first will be this idea that, and maybe I exaggerated a little bit in the start showing these images of Recife. The first is that living with the water, including embracing the water system as part of the public space of a city, is some of the points which over the years has developed very much in Holland. This is literally a water square, and normally there are less boats in the canals. This is a festival, but the living on the water and living with the water and having the water as an important public area in the cities is one of the big qualities of our cities. And I think it's the starting point of facing also the challenges of the water, because it's part of your daily environment. It's not something you exclude from your life. So that's the first thing I want to bring in from the Netherlands perspective. Second is what we call the layered landscape. Over the years, Holland is reinventing itself time over again. So there's one landscape on top of the other. We don't have space to waste any landscape and go to another place. Our country is extremely small, so everything happens in a cultural landscape of the past, and new things are added in the future. So you have a layer of the historic structure, and you have new layers of new infrastructure and innovation, like here it's very literal, with the train lines crossing the river. And the interesting thing is that making connections between the different layers, but also combining the different layers in systems, creates a very rich, very dynamic living environment. You have slow lines and you have fast lines. You have places of retreat and you have places of acceleration. Gives a very interesting landscape in which you can also tackle a lot of the challenges, but also you can incorporate heritage into new landscapes. And the third point I want to bring into the workshops, it's the technology, it's the skills, and that is what everybody expects, I think, from a country like Holland, is that we have this engineering power to solve problems by putting in technology. This is the access gateway to the port of Rotterdam, and that construction is larger than the Tour Eiffel in Paris, which can close the entrance to the port when there's high tides. So this tremendous technology can sometimes help us to solve problems. Another example where the technology is combined with very creative thinking is this example along the coast of the Netherlands of reinforced dunes. So the dunes which protect the cities from the sea were reinforced by bringing in a big concrete construction inside the dunes that was combined with the use as a parking garage. So all the people who want to go to the beach can park under the dunes in this area, and having these concrete constructions make the dunes by far more resistant to the sea. So that's another example of how technology can be of interest. The fourth point, it's about design. It's about design thinking, and it's about this resilient approach that we give room to the water and we try to be flexible in the way we deal with it. Along our rivers, we have a lot of problems and projects and interventions that took place over the past few years, called Room for the River, where very smart solutions were made where high tides can be absorbed without harming very much the living conditions. So this is an area which is normally in use as an agricultural area with farms and everything, but it is designed in such a way that with high tides, one by one, the areas will be flooded in such a way that life goes on, and the flood becomes almost part, and the water becomes part of our daily life and our daily routines. So this creative thinking, this design, how you can live with the water and how you can cope with high tides without having big catastrophes, is the fourth point I wanted to bring in. Another example is this river a little bit in the east of the Netherlands. It's the blue line here. There's not so much room in this area for the river to really deal with high levels. So a kind of reserve river, a second river, a green river was made, a riverbed, which you can see here parallel to it, which can help to create a second river in times of high floods. So there's a huge infrastructure with these gates that can open, which bring the water in case of this event, which is calculated on a risk of 1 in 80 every year. So people say once every 80 years, this might take place, that this second river will be needed. But in that case, it will be a kind of a guarantee for the safety of this whole area, and not the area will be flooded, but the green river will be flooded. And it will be a spectacular thing once that will happen. And maybe once or twice in your lifetime, you will experience this river to be part of it. So that's, again, a very creative design, using a lot of technology. But it's very much this text thinking. It's about making solutions and engineering solutions for the high tides. And the fifth point I want to bring in, that it's not enough to live with the water, use the technology to deal with these layered landscapes, and to have this design approach of giving room to water. We need more. We need, and that's also the urgency of the problem. Tech fix will not solve our problem. It can be a solution for partial things. But the whole thing is that we have to really reconsider our system. And to illustrate that, I want to show some images of the heart of the metropolis in Holland. This is more or less on the map where you have Amsterdam. Rotterdam is in the south, but in the heart, in between all the cities, is the Green Heart. And the Green Heart is one of the big historic landscapes creating the Netherlands. We have some images and the map. The Green Heart is a national park surrounded by Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, Dordrecht, which we will hear today or tomorrow, and Utrecht. And this park is surrounded by a ring of a metropolitan area. And inside this area, it's like you go back in time. You see this almost today, you can see this fantastic landscape with the windmills and the cows and the water and the fields. It's a very plain area, which you can see in the aerial image. And it's something which really is in the mind of the Dutch when they think about their home country. But if you look at this area, it's not just about flooding and high waters. It's also about a very severe land, lowering of the lands, which has been going on for 500 years and is now reaching a critical point. We have tremendous environmental issues with nitrogen disposition, with salination of the landscape. We have in summer problems of drought, and the peat, which is the soil of this area, faces strong oxidation and is shrinking. So altogether, we look at this beautiful landscape, but we have to realize that it's not threatened by flooding, but it's threatened by disappearance by itself. And all these problems together are far too big to solve with technology, tech fix, or design thinking. On the map on the right, you see the areas which have the highest cultural value, and you see all the problems they are facing. You can see that all these landscapes, it's like almost, it's the last moment we can see how they are now. We very strongly have to do something, otherwise the problems will take over and these landscapes will disappear. So although the landscape might look the way it looked centuries ago, the question is not if this heritage will change, but how it will change. Tech fix is not enough. We really have to reconsider the entire system. We have to rethink and reset, maybe have to retreat at certain areas in order to give a future. And the heritage is not the thing to conserve and preserve. It is very much maybe a key to create new landscapes, which in themselves bear a tribute to the immaterial heritage of the way how we have always been dealing with the water. Maybe also some of the elements of the landscapes, which can be a clue for designing new landscapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And we are approaching the end, but we still have time for a small discussion and yeah, I think the participants of the workshops got a lot of inspiration and also a lot of let's say very difficult tasks to what to do in 1 week and how to, let's say, to bring all this discussion together into something that can be communicated with society, with all the stakeholders in the city, and also to set up the basis for further discussion, or to start like a continued discussion on these topics, and taking the perspective of a city in the global south, or like city in a very risky situation, but a city that itself has a very clear division between rich and poor, and the way people live, the way people experience space, and the way the city has been produced. So I've been told that the workshop will continue later on, so we have to somehow wrap up the discussion of this morning. But I would like to ask from you that presented today, if you can, let's say, summarize in one message, what would be an important point for this workshop, this discussion? Because I have seen quite of parallel points between like the urgencies and how the problems are scaling up in a way that it's really hard to come up with solutions that can tackle everything. There was also quite a lot of mentions about of learning from the past and the values of heritage and how to understand this. And so I would like to, maybe I can put some questions as a provocation for the discussion, and maybe you can give us a little bit of your input on that. Let's say in the case of Recife, where you have competing heritage, I would say, like, and also they reflects a little bit on the case of Venice. Let's say Venice, there were several solutions studied how to cope with the rising sea level, with the aqua alta in the city, but there were, let's say, competing values. If they wanted to preserve the port functioning, if they wanted to preserve only the historical city center, if they wanted to preserve the, let's say, the ecological values in the lagoon, because any of the solutions would have an impact on one aspect or the other. In the end, there was a solution that there was basically no solution at all. And then you see that it doesn't cope with all the values. But so coming back to the case of Recife, how do you see these competing rhetorics about what to preserve in a context of a city that is already quite divided in very clear social groups, and where the value of heritage for some might be related to individual buildings, let's say the historical city center, but for low-income population, maybe what they think about heritage is preserving their practices of like being able to fish, being able to live close to the water. So yeah, I was trying to make a synthesis in the end. I made something even more complex. But if you can, let's say, give one suggestion or one way of looking at the problem during this week.
May I comment to that, Luis?
Yes.
It's provocative the way you put it. Normally, as a heritage expert, I always say you have to think the future starting from what there is. And from there on, from the values you have, you can see how you can incorporate them in your plans for the future. I think in this delta, if you start with a very defensive approach of what you have to preserve and how you have to keep the status quo and keep the water out, I think it will be very difficult to get to a solution. So maybe we should for once forget about this approach to start thinking from what there is and rethink the whole delta and start what would be an inhabitable delta. If we forget about Recife for just a few hours, what could be a sustainable model or a mental construction for this delta, and then see how we can make living conditions in that construct. And then maybe at the third place, the third step could be, how can we give a place to the existing city in that model? So it's like reinventing the city, first from what will be our new reality, and then in there see how we can incorporate the existing city, both its physical city, but of course more important perhaps is the immaterial thing, the living conditions, how people are living there. And it's like really making maybe a reset, because that will maybe help our imagination to face our daily problems. I mean, that's also the luxury you have at the workshop. We do not have to save all these billions invested in Recife. We have to try to find new ways of thinking our cities. So I think the more free we are and the more open, and so it's like a tabula rasa in a way. We have always been fighting the tabula rasa thinking in urbanism. Maybe in this landscape, it would be an interesting start.
And maybe I can echo that. I think we ought to project long-term in the future, say take 2080 as your point of departure, and then backtrace to see if that's where we want to be in 2080, what needs to happen. And then you can think about, well, in what timeline can you actually achieve these changes? So what kind of adaptive strategies do you need to get there? And this is, I think, really important also in relation to the ports. That's why I brought them up. because often these investments are for 10, 20, 30 years. So if you really want to convince the port of Rotterdam or the port of Venice, etc., to move or to come up with new practices or to accept that they may not be, in the case of the Netherlands, the biggest port of Europe, etc., that they may need to have value for the environment and not only for the nation or for the larger international context, then you need to give them a long-term perspective and understand the way they think. At least that's how I would look at it. So then we need to be able to accept and understand those different values. So if you say in 2080, there shouldn't be a port, let's just say in the Venice Lagoon, well, then what would that mean? Would that mean we have changed our habits of consumption? We don't need that many containers anymore. We don't need the whole petroleum transport anymore. But then let's make those clear lines on how we get there, how we clean up the sites that we're leaving. And so I think Henk also said that to get away from this mono-directional or mono-disciplinary thinking to a real ecosystem thinking on all the actors that are involved in this practice. And then heritage is no longer just pure heritage, which is the point I tried to make, but we're closing the loop, and the designers again become part of a culture that is forward-looking, but grounded in practices of the past, and not every practices of the past, but practices of the past that were actually circular. So it's really about changing mindsets before we come up with new technologies.
Yeah.
Very good.
I would say also that you could start by thinking that first we should need to keep our natural protection. Natural reefs and natural mangrove are the first line of protection. I would say it's really something that we can do by creating marine protected areas and so on, by trying to change the mind about how can those structures be helpful for the sea level rise. In the second part, I think that's very important, also trying to change what the people think about the rivers, channels, and so on. I think it's very important to be and to try to say to everybody, how can it help us, So this can be done with a lot of discussions, and this can be done with some kind of marketing, publicity, and so on, and trying to involve the people, trying to attract the people, the populations, and so on, the society, and in a different look to this structure, this water that we live in. So this is very important. We do not have a very nice relationship with all those beautiful landscapes and so on. What can you do is really to try to show that more broadly for the people that live in the city. And I think that another suggestion, in my opinion, it would be great, Luis and everybody, if you could have some specific locus for discussion about the Recife, about the future of the city. I would say some kind of observatory of Recife, not really physical constructions, but to put together people from different places around the world, as you do now, but in a continuous way, where we could also preserve the history of the city, the history of the climate change, because I think that in the future, the new generation will try to say, how was Recife? And, so it's very important also to have some privileged place to put all the people together and trying to think Recife in a more broad way, looking to the future. So these are some ideas that I think that you could move on, and this could help, in my opinion, and
it's a very
to protect, to discuss about the rivers, about the channel, etc., and to put people together.
It's a very good suggestion, because there are some facts in the history of Recife that not everyone is aware. Recife had these major floods in the 70s, but the current population, they are probably buying apartments, like very expensive apartments in areas that were previously flooded, but they don't have the memory of that anymore. So the memory of the territory, like what if water is a heritage, like so what was the water territory in the city in the past and how it has been lost, like, and also these different ways of living with water in the city. That's not only in the past. We still have part of the population that coexists with water in a different way, but they are marginalized. They are like outside of the main discussion, because when we discuss the future of the city, we think mostly about the buildings close to the seafront, like the expensive buildings where people from high income are living and they will be affected. But we have people already living in conditions that they experience climate change, global warming, and sea level rise on their daily lives. So it's maybe that will be something also where to start. And I've been asked to kind of offer a roundup of the discussion here, because the teams of the workshops are quite keen on starting to work after all this, let's say, positive pressure for the work, and also for a lot of seeds for thoughts and things to be explored. And I was also asked to say that there will be some videos shared here on this link of Zoom. So there will be some more information to be shared in the same Zoom meeting here. And afterwards, the two teams will start to work on the cases. So I would like to thank everyone for joining, especially the ones who presented today. It was a bit hectic in terms of time, but that we need to adapt. We are not following a very, let's say, top-down protocol. So it's like adaptation starting from the way we work. So, but hopefully after 10 years of working together with Brazil and the Netherlands, you somehow have to incorporate that into your practice. And I have something, it's kind of a joke. Like, I took part on the first iteration of this exchange between the Netherlands and Recife. And it was really, to me, it was a bit shocking to understand that we from the Recife side were trying to learn from the Dutch how to be organized, fully controlled, doing long-term planning. And then the Dutch partners, they were saying, yeah, but actually we want to learn how do you do a city without long-term planning, without being organized and things. So it was like a nice shock from the first iteration. I think somehow we have been cross-contaminated, like, so we are trying to learn how to integrate different disciplines into planning, into long-term planning. But here in the Netherlands, I also have seen quite a lot of calls for being more adaptable, being more flexible, being a little bit more resilient, let's say. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and it was really a pleasure. And yeah, really looking forward to see the results of the workshop. And wish all the good luck for the participants. Thanks again for everyone that presented today.
Thank you, and very nice to see you all and have a nice discussion during the workshop. I will try to follow some time, but not really sure because anyway. But very good to know you, Paul, Carola, and everybody.
Thank you, Luis.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
A redução da cobertura vegetal na cidade, a redução da permeabilização do solo, a não cobertura de saneamento básico na cidade, né, provocando poluição de rios, córregos, canais, o estímulo ao transporte individual motorizado, que foi o grande protagonista durante décadas, né, na nossa cidade, não só na nossa cidade, né, mas nas grandes cidades do nosso país. São alguns dos fatores que colaboraram para deixar o Recife nessa posição de 16ª cidade mais vulnerável às mudanças climáticas. Esse pacote de ações humanas, né, nos trouxe até essa condição, mas cabe a nós agora atuarmos de forma a mitigar esses impactos que já chegaram e que virão mais fortes se nada for feito. Então, eu acho que algo importante que a gente fez, né, que a gente vem fazendo dentro da ARES, como uma entidade da sociedade civil organizada. A ARES é a Agência Recife para a Inovação Estratégica, e a ARES foi responsável pela elaboração do Plano Recife 500 anos. É um plano de longo prazo da cidade, com diversos caminhos estratégicos que levem a cidade para que o Recifense precisa em 2037, quando o Recife fizer 500 anos, vai ser a primeira capital a completar 500 anos. E dentre esses caminhos estratégicos indicados no plano está o caminho da resiliência ambiental, com diversas ações dentro do plano para que Recife se torne uma cidade resiliente do ponto de vista ambiental. Isso passa pela ampliação, na verdade pela universalização da cobertura de saneamento. Isso passa pela implementação de uma logística reversa para embalagens, por exemplo, da questão do manejo dos resíduos sólidos, enfim, do estímulo ao transporte ativo. São diversas ações, né, dentro do plano que a gente tem procurado estimular e colaborar para que eles aconteçam. O município de Recife tem avançado nessa questão, recentemente entregou um inventário de gases de efeito estufa, entregou um plano local de ação climática, e a ARES, através do projeto City Nova, vai entregar dentro de alguns meses um plano setorial de adaptação às mudanças climáticas, que vai indicar para alguns setores da sociedade, setores da cidade, não setores geográficos, mas setores como economia, transformação urbana, saneamento, mobilidade, como cada um desses setores deve se preparar para as mudanças climáticas que vão vir. Essa entrega vai ser feita dentro de alguns meses e sempre com o objetivo de reduzir as desigualdades sociais, né, que se acentuarão, né, com as mudanças climáticas, e sempre no sentido de diminuição da emissão de CO2. Então, é a contribuição que a ARES vem dando para esse debate, para essa transformação, para a implementação de políticas públicas que mitiguem essa questão das mudanças climáticas no Recife.
Eu quero elogiar o evento Recife Exchange Netherlands 2021, elogiar a Universidade Federal, ICLEI, todos os organizadores, Roberto Montezuma e todos os pesquisadores, cientistas que participam, e ressaltar a importância dessa parceria do Recife com os Países Baixos, né, já que o Recife foi reconhecido pelo painel internacional do IPCC como a 16ª cidade mais vulnerável, né, ao efeito das mudanças climáticas com o aumento do nível do mar. O Recife, como cidade litorânea, vai ter muitos impactos em relação a isso. Lá atrás, o Recife, através do programa Urban LEDs, ele começou um trabalho importante que foi realizar o inventário da emissão de gases, realizar o plano de ação para a redução das emissões, que deu resultados concretos e vem dando, e partiu também para ações concretas, como a Maratona Verde, colocar a questão da emergência climática para dentro das escolas, para os alunos já poderem estudar isso. Então, ações concretas também foram realizadas, realização da Conferência Nacional de Mudanças Climáticas aqui no Recife, foram ações importantes. E o relatório, o estudo, em parceria com o ICLEI, para poder avaliar os riscos, né, as vulnerabilidades e o plano de adaptação, que é fundamental para esse processo que a gente vive agora. Se o Recife é uma das cidades, assim como muitas outras litorâneas, que vai sofrer bastante com essa questão do aumento do nível do mar, a gente vai precisar de ações que são ações de médio e longo prazo. Nada é curto. O que a gente está fazendo para reduzir as emissões e para participar do debate internacional sobre redução das emissões é uma das partes. A outra é o plano de adaptação, e o Recife precisa ter um foco nisso, e sem dúvida nenhuma, nos próximos anos, serão influenciados pelo que se discutir aqui nesse evento que acontece agora. Então, mais uma vez, um elogio a todos que participam do evento.
Bom dia, meu nome é Pierre Fernandes, eu sou arquiteto, professor da Universidade de Toulouse e diretor da Escola Nacional Superior de Arquitetura de Toulouse. Eu tenho uma tradição de cooperação com o Brasil de uma forma geral e com o Recife em particular. Eu já fui professor visitante na UFPE, eu já fui adido cultural no consulado francês para o Nordeste. Para mim é um prazer, uma honra poder participar desse evento RXN e acrescentar um pouco com a perícia francesa a respeito do assunto. Acontece que a França desenvolveu muito o conceito de PRI, proteção de risco de inundação. Aí se trata tanto das chuvas quanto da subida das águas de rio e de mar. E a nossa abordagem do assunto é uma abordagem, vamos dizer, híbrida. A gente aprendeu muito, aliás, ultimamente com a pandemia, sobre o fato que não vai bastar se proteger, vai precisar também se adaptar depois. Ter uma forma de resiliência. Eu acho que o evento RXN vai tratar muito dessas questões, não de uma coisa ou outra, mas de como articular proteção e adaptação. E com colegas, o especialista da área, Juan Carlos Rocha Arias, que vai também participar, vamos tentar dar a nossa contribuição, esperando que tudo seja um sucesso nesse evento, e mais uma vez é um grande prazer poder participar junto com vocês.